People tend to be extremely tribal, and what they're really concerned with is winning. It becomes a competition of us versus them. It becomes our side versus their side, and they tend to exploit weaknesses and then attack to score points. And all ideas of being honest intellectually or looking at things objectively kind of go out the window. You ignore facts that diminish your position or your team's position and highlight things, even if they're not real, that would diminish the other side's position. This is a real problem that humans have with arguments, with being tribal, with being on different sides. I mean, we see it, forget about tribes, we see it with people, where when there's a certain time when you see people arguing, there's a certain point where the argument has deteriorated to a competition. And it's no longer about what you're actually discussing, it's about who can win.
Yeah, and this is what science is for.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
science ought to be indifferent. When it's done well, it is indifferent to who's the stronger team. It should really just tell you what's true. And in fact, the reason to use science is to correct for biases. So Eric and Heather and I have a phrase that it's just shorthand for something, which is bad faith changes everything. There's a lot you can do in discussion with people with whom you disagree, as long as you are on the same page to a large extent.
Yes.
And what you're describing is what happens when that system breaks down and people perceive themselves as needing to win against the enemy rather than on a team that is trying to navigate to what is true or what is the most desirable outcome with respect to values that we all share or something like that. So what you're describing is a very common state. It is a lower, less capable state than a good faith environment where people who may disagree intensely agree on the basic rules and the desirability of figuring out what's true. And so maybe that's part of what we can do here is try to point to where the good faith conversation can get to that the bad faith conversation is incapable of getting to. The value, really.
Yeah, I think that's a giant point. It really is. And it's really something that I would hope more people would adopt going into the future. Stop connecting yourself to these ideas and just let these ideas exist on their own and examine them objectively and rely on science. Rely on actual science to formulate when you're talking about biological issues.
And that's when I say science is the answer to this. It's not necessarily that we should accept, no one should accept the findings of science just at face value, but a scientific approach is, I've got this idea. What would have to be true if that were true? And how can I possibly prove it wrong? And you work harder and harder and harder to prove it wrong. And if you can't, then you have greater and greater and greater confidence that maybe it's right. And so this is what we don't see in bad faith arguments, is no one is trying to prove themselves wrong. And that sounds backwards the first time you hear it, but if you try to actually demonstrate that your own cherished beliefs are wrong and you can't do it, you have pretty good confidence at the end of that, and there is no actual end, but the longer you've gone, you have pretty good confidence that actually I'm probably seeing something real here. I've asked myself, I've asked my friends, I've asked my enemies, is this thing right? And, in an actual formal scientific setting, you do an experiment, you run the data, and you do the analysis. But is it right or is it not? Let's see if I can prove it's not, even though I really think it is.
So you
it's
also
a really good test.
You get something, there's a bonus that comes with it, which is, I don't know what else to say, it's super awesome, which is if you've tried to take your cherished idea, some hypothesis that you've come up with, and you've tried 16 different ways to show that it's wrong, and you keep failing. Well, every one of those things you did to see whether what you thought was true is actually false now prepares you. When somebody now challenges you and they say, oh, but you haven't thought of this. Well, you have. You've been through it 16 different ways, and that gives you the ability to navigate almost anything that's thrown at you because you have taken on the role of being your own harshest critic in order to make sure that what's left at the end of that process is really robust. The other thing that I want to insert here is that I think, I don't want to be put in the position of defending everything that's been published in the scientific literature as true because it looks like science. A lot of it isn't. a lot of what's published in the scientific literature is not valid. The methodology does not establish what people claim it does. And that's a big hazard for people like Heather and myself, because you have to sort the wheat from the chaff in order to figure out what to defend and what to be agnostic about.